I'm Lee C. Camp, and this is No Small Endeavor, exploring what it means to live a good life.
We long to be seen. We long to then be soothed. How many of us walk around with these griefs?
That's psychiatrist Dr. Curt Thompson, and this Valentine's Day, we're talking about what it takes to form real, authentic relationships, the kind that can transform us.
We have been trained to believe that we are machines.
Curt challenges the way we hide our pain, our longing, and our shame, often even from ourselves.
The parts of me that I hate the most, the parts of me that I'm ashamed of. We are so committed to burying that.
But he insists that healing begins not with fixing, but with being known.
Who do you see me becoming, and what is it like for you to live with that person who I'm becoming?
That and more coming right up.
Hey friend, if you didn't know, I started a newsletter a while back that comes out every 2 weeks. I've been delighted to hear from so many of you about positive response to the newsletter. We call it the No Small Endeavor Notebook, where I riff on themes and topics related to our podcast, giving you additional material for thinking and doing in your own quest to make sense of what it might mean to live a good life. Join us by going now to nosmallendeavor.com and sign up there. Again, go to nosmallendeavor.com to sign up now for our free No Small Endeavor Notebook newsletter.
I'm Lee C. Camp, and this is No Small Endeavor, exploring what it means to live a good life. Valentine's Day often brings attention to love, its sweetness, its ache, its complexity. But this year, we're inviting you into a different kind of conversation, not just about romantic love, but about the deeper, quieter work of becoming someone who can love and be loved well. At the heart of meaningful relationships, whether with a partner, friends, family, or community, there are three often uncomfortable realities: desire, vulnerability, and suffering. And if we're willing to face those things honestly, they might just become the doorway to the kind of connection for which we long. To guide us through this terrain, we're joined by psychiatrist Dr. Curt Thompson.
You don't have to train kids to do this, but eventually at some point where kids get old enough, they start to bring you things that they have made, and they think it's great, and they want you to think it's great.
That desire to be seen, Curt says, it never goes away. Curt has spent years exploring how spiritual formation and neuroscience meet in the everyday fabric of our relationships. And in this episode, we draw from three of his books that have served me well over the years, each reflecting on a different layer of what it means to live with openness, courage, and compassion. Three practices which facilitate more fruitful relationships with others and oneself. So in today's episode with Curt, we first explored desire, not just what we want, but how our wanting shapes us.
It's not just what do I get to have. It is in the pursuit of what I say that I want, what kind of a person am I becoming?
From desire, we turn to shame, how it quietly isolates us, and how vulnerability can break that spell amidst trusted community.
For me to have the awareness like, oh my gosh, Lee has seen the worst of me, and here he remains.
And finally, we turn to the inevitable hardships which come in life and love and explore possibilities for navigating suffering.
It's very difficult for us to be with people and feel powerless to help them and not recognize that our very presence in and of itself is an antidote to suffering.
So, if you're looking for possibilities of a bit more authenticity and depth in your relationships, then this conversation is for you. Here's our conversation with Dr. Curt Thompson.
Dr. Curt Thompson, welcome back.
Lee Camp, my man. Oh, my gracious.
It's good to have you back with us.
Thank you.
Let's first start talking about desire. From some theological perspectives, desire is often depicted as something to be frightened of, I think. But you're insisting, that desire and the celebration of desire is at the heart of what it means to be human. So begin to, tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, I think you look around and the notion of desire is undeniable. Now, some would say that what we first see with newborns and infants and toddlers, their longing for things, their appetites for things at first, one might just code that as just intuitive to what it means to be kind of an animal, right? There's a sense in which, well, so do horses want to be fed in the way that we are also hungry and tired and so forth. But one of the things that we see with children that lands in this area of attachment is this idea that we long to be seen. You know, we watch newborns, and you will watch newborns and infants, and you find their gaze, and you find them wanting to see your gaze. Desire for that is plain. I want to be seen. And that doesn't stop with being a newborn. How many of us walk into a room and when we see someone who sees us and recognize this longing to be seen is unquenchable. So we long to be seen. We long to then be soothed. How many of us walk around with these griefs that we carry? We say that we are people of great longing. We are people of great grief. Human beings are. And this is also something that we see in newborns and toddlers, of course, but this also doesn't change. I will go to my grave wanting to be soothed of all kinds of things, not just soothed of my fractured hip that's going to happen when I fall over when I'm 82, but also my emotional states. But I also, then there's this word, I want to be safe, which means I long to be comfortable and confident. With children, we want to protect them. We want to keep them safe from things that are harmful, that are outside their skin. But here's the other thing that we often don't recognize is that I also need to be protected from myself. I have to be made safe from my own impulses. My impulses to do all kinds of things that will not be good for me and not be good for other people. And so parents, their job is to both protect me in order for me to become comfortable and confident, not just because the world is safe for me, but because I am safe for the world. And that takes a lot of work, in which I have to also learn how to demonstrate restraint. All this has to do with longing, has to do with desire. It has to do with our desire becoming more mature, because here's the other thing that we then see with children. You don't have to train kids to do this, but eventually at some point where kids get old enough, they start to bring you things that they have made. It's something that they've colored. It's something that they've formed, and they think it's great, and they want you to think it's great. They want you to put it on your refrigerator and invite the neighbors and charge money to see it, because there is this impulse within us to make things. This longing for beauty, this longing to create, and for our creative endeavors to be enjoyed by other people. And so there is this sense of innate human longing. Now this is creativity. This is a longing that goes way beyond just the instincts of animals. As much as we'd like to believe that animals have the capacity cognitively to be aware that they're aware in the way that humans are, there's just no evidence of that. But even that thing that I make, that object of beauty that I see, I also long to enjoy that with someone else. So I create this, and the thing that I create also then creates the opportunity for greater connection with community. Mm-hmm. One last thing, though, I think is important to say, and this comes from the work of French philosopher and literary critic René Girard, who talks an awful lot about desire. And I think Girard rightly points out, and this is from an anthropology standpoint, that I don't just long for things. My desire is not just innate. It is a thing, like many things, that emerges from within me, but that needs to be trained. And the way that it's trained is that I don't just desire a particular car or a particular person. I desire that car, that person, because someone else desires it. Meaning desire is something that I experience, but it is also simultaneously something that is mediated for me.
Which I think he uses the phrase mimetic desire, that imitative desire, yeah.
Right. This comes from other research independent of his, having to do with mirror neurons and so forth and so on. This notion that intentional human behavior is ultimately mimicked behavior. I do that behavior because I watch someone else do it. Empathy, for example, is an intentionally acted human behavior. It is not just so natural like breathing is. I have to watch it be done to someone else, or I have to have that experience be done to me, and then I mimic it. All intentional human behavior is mimicked, and such is the notion of desire. So the question is then not just, what do I desire, but who are my models? Who are the people that I watch that show me what is desirable?
So this is implicit in what you just shared there, but how do you think then about disordered desire? You're suggesting we need to be quite careful about the exemplars that teach us what is desirable. But if we're pressed to give some sort of abstract definition of disordered desire, what would that mean to you?
Some of our listeners may be aware that I'm a follower of Jesus. And so one of the questions, of course, that the Christian and Hebrew scriptures raise is the differentiation between the question, what do I want and how do I get it? Which is really the conundrum of Genesis chapter 3, where we're going to take from the tree of the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil, versus the question of who am I becoming? And I think this is a question that is important when we consider desire. If I am going to act on desires that turn me into a person who is utterly self-centered, we have other language in our field of interpersonal neurobiology for that. When we are people of integration, when we are people who are well differentiated and those differentiated parts are linked together, the Bible would call this, we are people of wholeness. We are people who demonstrate love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Who would argue with that? Who's going to argue and say, I want to be a person who's less peaceful. I want to be a person who's less kind. I want to be more mean by the end of the day. We don't know a lot of people who are trying to become disintegrated or emotionally dysregulated. It's not just what is my desire and what do I get to have. It is in the pursuit of what I say that I want. Who am I becoming? What kind of a person am I becoming? And so disordered desires, we would say, are my pursuing things and pursuing things in a particular way. It's not just the object itself. And typically there is going to be some model that is involved that is modeling not just the thing that I want, but modeling how I pursue it. And all of that is then going to reflect on the question of who am I becoming? And so if you were to say, okay, I want you to think of 3 people you could ask this question to, and this isn't an easy question if we think about it. If you were to ask your friends, what is it like for you to live with me?
Mm.
Who do you see me becoming? And what is it like for you to live with that person who I'm becoming? And if they were going to answer that honestly, I think those are the kinds of questions that shed light on what it means for us to have desires of order or desires that are disordered.
You said at the top of the conversation that one of our deep desires is to be seen. What do you think are some of the particular ways in contemporary life that often leave people feeling unknown or unseen, even though we're supposedly quite connected?
We live in a world in which, in some respects, with social media and so forth, we do everything we can to promote and expose certain elements of who we are, such that we are seen in innumerable ways. But again, like unto the question of desire, it's not just what do I desire, but in what way am I attempting to acquire what I desire? So it's not just what part of me is being seen, but behind the curtain, what is it that I am trying to accomplish by being seen? Am I trying to cope with the other parts of me that are not seen? Do I paint a picture that is so impenetrable that the parts of me that are tender, the parts of me that feel wounded, the parts of me that are unhealed, I'm protecting to make sure they are not ever seen? The parts of me that I hate the most, the parts of me that I'm ashamed of, the parts of me that I'm angry about, but I never really bring out into public. Those are the parts that we actually long to have be seen, but we are so committed to burying that. We are so committed to keeping parts of us outside of ourselves and away from ourselves. We're not even aware of it. It's not a mystery that we live in a violent world. Our violence, in many respects, is a way for us to cope with the grief of the parts of us that have not actually been seen.
I'd also like to go back to your commentary a moment ago about beauty, and that in this desire to be seen, to be known, we have this desire to make beauty. Speak to that in maybe practical terms. That is, what might it look like to lean into that reality and to make the pursuit of beauty something that could deepen our relationships with one another?
I'll give you a concrete example, and I write about this in The Soul of Desire. There was a story of a woman who was in one of these confessional communities that we were facilitating, and in the course of it, she had mentioned offhandedly at one point that she had tried her hand at painting. And it was a passing comment, and it turns out that she'd had quite a gift for this, but her life had taken the kind of turn that had made it really challenging for her to even think about that. The form and depth of the trauma that she had undergone made that whole part of her life not even something she could possibly consider. And in the course of several months in this community of healing, at one point, one of the other members, and it was significant that it was a male in the room, that circled back around and brought this to her attention and said, I want to hear more about this. And it was as if she had to think a moment about what he was talking about. It was as if it's this far removed from her because of her trauma. It was something that long ago had been decided was not going to be worthy of her pursuit. And he invites her to come to talk about it again, and there was so much of this gift of hers that had actually been entangled with her trauma that the very act of talking about it evoked things within her that were not easy for her to talk about. At some point, one of the members said, I just would love to see one of your pieces. And by hook or by crook, at some point, she brings in one of her pieces. One thing leads to another, and within about 6 to 9 months, this woman had not only begun to paint again, but agreed when asked to offer her work at a gallery that led to her work now being in different galleries across the region and in the country, all because someone in a community decided that they were going to notice something about who she was. It was something that she was not going to imagine on her own. She had to have other people imagine it for her while her imagination was trying to catch up. I think about people like Van Gogh and the British art critic who was the reason that his work came to be in the public consciousness. And so many different stories of how we need others to see things in us and to call this forward. I mean, this is what happens with little children. We see it and we encourage it, and it calls more of it forward. But it's not just in the explicit expression of art itself. It's in the development of new ideas. It's in starting a new business. It's in repairing a ruptured relationship. It's in all kinds of ways in which beauty can emerge as a result of the healing that takes place. And because the energy that I've previously been using to contain all that unfinished business is now available for me to create and curate beauty and goodness as I was initially created to do.
You're listening to No Small Endeavor and a conversation with Dr. Curt Thompson. I love hearing from you. Tell us what you're reading, who you're paying attention to, or send us feedback about today's episode. You can reach me at lee@nosmallendeavor.com. You can get show notes for this episode in your podcast app or wherever you listen. These notes include links to resources mentioned in the episode and a full transcript. We also have a free bi-monthly newsletter in which I riff on themes and behind-the-scenes goings-on called the NSC Notebook. You can subscribe to that newsletter for free by going to our website at nosmallendeavor.com/newsletter. Coming up, Curt and I discuss the role of storytelling and community as an antidote to shame. Hello, friends. Lee Seacamp here. Do you ever wish you had more folks to discuss the conversations we offer on No Small Endeavor? Something like a podcast listening club where you could engage big ideas about what it means to live life well and then discuss it with friends and companions? If so, you have stumbled upon the announcement you have been waiting for. We're pleased to announce the start of Endeavor Together, our new initiative that equips and nurtures close-knit communities to talk about the things you actually want to talk about. Each small group conversation series is built upon our podcast content and provides you with super easy to use content with questions, videos, links, and guidance so that you or any good and willing soul can host small group conversations exploring what it means to live a good life. Maybe you'll meet in homes around a table, maybe in a coffee shop or local park, maybe at work during lunch hour, maybe in a church Sunday school class. What we are providing is the scaffolding for good conversation. The rest is up to you. And here's the best part. Thanks to generous support from the Lilly Endowment, it's free. The first two series have been released. The first, Let's Disagree Better, and the second, Vulnerability. Get started today. Visit nosmallendeavor.com and click on Endeavor Together. Again, go to nosmallendeavor.com and click on Endeavor Together. Enjoy. So let's turn to shame as one of these things that inhibits imagination, but also you've written a lot about how it inhibits just the connection you see as central to our human desire. Let's first ask you a very short definition of shame.
First of all, it's important to know that it is a neurophysiological response. It is not just an emotional response to a cognitive, like I hear somebody say something about me and then I feel bad. It's a neurophysiologic response that can emerge as early as 15 to 18 months of age in a human, which means this is long before children understand language, long before I know why I feel what I feel. And it results, we see it in a turning away physiologically. I turn my gaze away from you. I will put my head down. I will lower and turn my shoulders inward, often turn my whole torso away from you. We will see this sometimes in dogs, right? It's very primal in this sense. And so we encounter it and begin to respond to it very early in life without having any explicit cognitive sense of what's happening. It's all very automated. There's this felt sense that I'm feeling something, and my feeling of it is related to the gaze that I see with you, that the tone of voice that I've heard, something that I've encountered non-verbally even. I'm trying to get away from me, essentially. And it leads then to other things. It leads to what we call disintegrated states, disconnection. Anyone who's listening, we know that when we sense shame, it's hard for us to feel shame and think clearly, to be creative, to be engaged with other people. My heart rate will go up, my blood pressure will go up. I will want to leave connection with other people, but I also leave connection within myself. I sense, I image, I feel, I think, and I behave with my body. All five of those general features of what the mind does tend to be disconnected from one another. There's interesting data on the differentiation between shame and guilt, and this notion that guilt is the thing that we sense when we are older, somewhere between 4 and 6 years of age, much later in developmental life, that requires the presence of a prefrontal cortex that can tell the difference between me and you. And I've done something that hurts our relationship. There's you, there's me, and the thing I've done. I have a mind at this age that is able to actually parse those things. And so one major difference is that when I feel shame, I tend to turn away from you. Children, young people who feel guilt will tend to move towards someone to say, I'm sorry. Will you forgive me? I want to move because there is this thing that I've done. Guilt is I've done something bad. Shame is I am bad, even though I wouldn't even use those words because I don't have them at 20 months of age. And what's then most important is that it leads to this disconnection and hiding. I feel ashamed, and then I feel ashamed that I feel ashamed. And so I want to increasingly move further into the woods, further into the darkness. The things about my life for which I feel shame, I want to keep them out of the awareness of other people. And this is why in the story of the biblical narrative, so often we see the notion of what we call sin and the notion of shame entangled with each other. They are often paired. And where we would say that in many respects, shame is the affective state of sin. It's that neuroaffective representation of sin. And this notion of like why it is that we need to have somebody come find us. When I feel ashamed of something that I've said or done to you, it's not going to be easy for me to want to come and say, Lee, I feel really ashamed. The very act of saying I feel ashamed brings it right into the room, and I don't like that. Which is why we Christians would say we've needed God to come and find us, because it's so hard for us to go and find other people when shame is so thick around our waists. And I think the cognitive element of shame that we pay a lot of attention to is that of condemnation and contempt. Anyone who is condemning other people are doing so out of their largesse, of their self-contempt. It's just spilling out of and over my own riverbanks. Those people who shame people are themselves full up with shame, and I have no idea what to do with it except share it with my friends and neighbors. And so this contempt, this self-condemnation gets back to this notion that like as human beings, every baby comes into the world looking for someone, looking for him or looking for her, and that never stops. And shame creates the opposite effect, this felt sense of your departure, that you're going to see something about me that is so shameful that you're going to turn and leave, and you're going to want nothing more to do with me. And it's why the healing of shame proves to be such a powerful antidote, but it's not going to happen because I just say to you, well, Lee, you don't need to be ashamed of that. What I need to do is to come closer and say, tell me more about the shame that you feel, in order for me to have the neurophysiologic experience of you hearing the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth, and not leaving the room. And for me to have the awareness of like, oh my gosh, Lee has seen the worst of me, and here he remains.
Yeah. It's so counterintuitive, I suppose, that the very thing that one most fears in the midst of shame is the only way out, right?
That's right. It's so true. It's so true.
You've as well have discussed a lot about having some sort of community in which this kind of healing from shame can occur. And I know in my own life, I have had profound experiences with a number of groups through the years, but I've got one in particular right now that we all know the worst about one another, and we've heard one another talk about that for years now. And we don't talk about the worst all the time, right? But when it's necessary, if we fall down into some space that's related to the worst of ourselves, you don't have to retell the whole story again. You can just get right to it, you know?
That's right.
And there's those ongoing layers of acceptance, and all of a sudden the weight of that can just be taken off of our hearts and souls.
Yeah, I was with my own group of men this morning doing the same thing. And this morning was a morning in which I was retelling a story. It's not new information in that sense, in terms of data, but it is new in the sense that it is not last week or a month ago. This is not a matter of like, oh, Curt, we've already heard this. We already know this, as if that this is separate from me. Because we're all wondering, okay, how many times do I have to tell this story to Lee before Lee's going to just roll his eyes in contempt and say, like, dude, like, when are you going to get over this? Or when are you going to stop being human and become something else? And this is what's difficult, right? We live in a world in which we are trained. First of all, as my friend Warren Kinghorn likes to remind us, we have been trained to believe that we are machines. And when we think about machines that are troubled, that means you just take the machine to the shop and they fix the machine and the machine is good as new. And if you can't make it good as new, you just trade it in for a different machine.
vulnerability as an exercise, community as an exercise and a practice in dealing with the shame that alienates us from one another. What about some practices of dealing with the internal shame or the internal narratives I tell myself that I may even be unaware of that kind of alienate me from myself or that lead to my own disintegration? How do we go about learning to surface those, navigate those?
In the practice, when people come in, they come for a range of different reasons. The whole gamut of neuropsychiatric challenges that people experience: depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder, addictions, marriage problems, you name it. Let's just take, for instance, someone who's significantly depressed. And they would say, I think there's something wrong with me. And it's easy for us, once again, to think of that person who's depressed or anxious, panic attacks or whatever, as they have a problem. And the problem is their depression, for example. But one of the things I tell people is it is true that your depression is problematic, but your depression in some respects is not so much the problem. In fact, when you think that your brain is broken because you're depressed, I want to say to you, in fact, your brain is doing exactly what it should be doing, given the life that it has been asked to live. I'm saying all that in answer to your question because it is to say that humans, our brain-body matrices, are actually quite trustworthy. They will tell us when something's not okay. They reveal us to ourselves. Now, we might not know exactly what it is that's being revealed, but when I'm depressed, when I'm having panic events, it's telling me something about the story that I have been telling myself about myself for some period of time, but am not aware that I'm even doing that. This is what I mean when I say that it's challenging, because we can, in some respects, if we just come to see the psychiatrist who thinks that the only thing that is happening here is a depressed person, I'm going to give them medication, often which is absolutely necessary. But if all I'm trying to do is to get rid of symptoms, then I'm actually minimizing who that person actually is as a human being, because they're not a machine. They're a creature, living, breathing, growing, becoming creature. And that creature is going to have all kinds of things that will demonstrate that something's going on internally, even the things that they don't know that they don't know. But they are going to show up. So when you ask the question, well, what about the shame that is within me that I may not even know about, or the shame that I know about is hard? We will say that our life will reveal that. Our life will reveal that something's happening. And then the question becomes, who are the people in my life who will be there to ask me the questions? Tell me what you're sensing. Tell me what you're imaging. Tell me what you're thinking. Tell me what the sense is that you're making of all that. It's like the patient I talk about quite frequently. He's now been my patient for a decade and a half, almost 2 decades. When I first met this person, I asked them, well, tell me about what it was like growing up in your home. And they said, well, I grew up in a loving Christian home. And then when you ask the question, well, who was in charge of discipline? And you start to hear that, gosh, things in his house were quite violent and brutal. It's as if he's substituted himself for another person who's telling a different version of this story. Like, what happened to the loving Christian home? And it's not as if he was lying to me when he said, I grew up in a loving Christian home. This is the story that he tells, that he really believes, but he doesn't pay that much attention because nobody asks him the question, who is in charge of discipline in your house? I'm like, who asks that question at a cocktail party? You could try it. People either want to talk to you more or less once you have, right? This notion that there are questions to be asked of me that I'm not going to easily ask myself because I won't think to do it. But when I'm in community that is asking these questions, that's what gets at, when we say practices, what are the practices? I want to be curious about, well, where is shame showing up? How can I be aware? There in the book, The Soul of Shame, there's an exercise that we invite people to do. It's called a shame inventory. Not maybe your favorite drink to do an inventory on shame, but it is a way of people actually turning toward and looking at shame instead of running away from it in order to identify, where is this showing up? In order for me then to bring this to a community to say, this is what I'm discovering, and for them to ask me more questions about these hidden rooms in my interior house where this is all held.
Coming up is a short break, followed by a discussion with Curt on suffering, storytelling, and community.
LinkedIn is pretty great at a lot of things, like helping you tap into the latest trends and insights in your field. We cannot stop your coworker from tapping her pencil. LinkedIn can help you find new jobs that align with your career goals. We cannot help you find the source of that weird smell in the office fridge. Ew. And while we can't stop your coworkers from bringing their hobbies into the office, LinkedIn can help you bring your career to the next level. LinkedIn is the network that works for you.
You have suggested in the book called The Deepest Place that it might be helpful that instead of yielding to this desire that we seem to have of eliminating suffering, instead to see suffering as a place that's a crucible that can allow us to become a person that we couldn't become otherwise. So begin to unpack some of that primary thesis for us.
One of the important questions I think for each of us to be answering at any time is, what story do I believe I'm living? And the reason it's important for us to answer that question is because if I believe that I'm in the middle of a story in which I really do believe I'm a machine, suffering isn't going to have meaning. Suffering will only be something that I just need to rid myself of. And yet I can't. And so what am I supposed to do about that? One of the things that we recognize about the story of the Hebrew Bible and the story of the Christian scriptures is that the Christians and Hebrews believed in a God who honors suffering. The Western metaphysic would say suffering is bad and we're going to do everything we can to cure it, to get rid of it, so forth and so on. But it also leads to the story that we tell that if I am suffering, there's something wrong with the world or wrong with me, and that I need to do everything I can to get out of that. Eastern metaphysics, again, these are overly simplified, but an Eastern metaphysic would say that suffering in some respects is just something that we are making up in our mind. And with the right posture of mind, we can divest ourselves of suffering. The Christian Hebrew story tells a different story. It tells a story of we see suffering and we're going to walk right toward it. To honor suffering is not to say that we glorify it. It's not to say that we enjoy it. It's not to say that we look for ways to elevate it. We do everything we can to mitigate it as we are able. We do what we can about disease. We do what we can about all kinds of medical and psychological suffering and so forth and so on. The challenge is what happens when we encounter those things that are not going to budge. The cancer that I'm not going to escape. The chronic pain syndrome that I have. That my father took his life when I was 15. I will live with that forever. What am I going to do with that? That I am married to someone who is suffering deeply from some kind of illness, and I'm going to be with them for years. And this doesn't begin to talk about all kinds of other social sufferings that we encounter here in the West and all over the world. This doesn't even begin, right? It is the gospel that comes and says we want to be with this. And so that story is important, because one of the things we would say, even from a neurobiological standpoint, is that I suffer as a human is different than what happens to any other creature. Horses, cats, squirrels do not suffer as humans do. Now, people might think, oh my gosh, yes, they do. We don't have any evidence of this. And by this, I don't mean to say that they don't experience pain. They certainly do. But what we mean when we talk about suffering, we're really talking about a human being's response to pain over time, which includes my capacity as a human being to tell time in the way that I do. Because for me to encounter pain is one thing. For me to encounter pain and be aware that this pain may be with me until I die in 40 years, that's a whole other kettle of fish. And that adds to what I'm experiencing even now. But that whole notion of how I tell time, the story that I tell within time, is all shaped, once again, by my community. By whom am I being seen, soothed, safe, and made to be secure in the middle of my pain? Who is willing to be with me no matter how long this lasts? Am I able to imagine that you aren't going to run out of patience when my pain seems to not run out of gas. And so I think one of the major things that we would say that suffering does is the opportunity for it to turn me into a particular kind of person. Exploring that same question even apart from my suffering.
You're saying that the same question that you might ask about desire, namely, what kind of person am I becoming by my pursuit of this desire, to ask what kind of person am I becoming by the way in which I am seeking to navigate this suffering?
That's right. Even for some of our listeners, they may have heard of a character in the Bible called Job. And, Job was a man who thinks about suffering. And he had friends, and they couldn't keep their mouths shut. They tried as hard as they could just to be present with him. They tried and tried, but at some point they just had to start to talk to Job about what it was that he did that has him in the predicament that he's in. It's very difficult for us to be with people and feel powerless to help them and not recognize that our very presence in and of itself is an antidote to suffering.
You said a moment ago that you're not suggesting here that there's some sort of masochistic pursuit of pain and suffering, right?
Right.
There's no sort of glorification of pain or suffering in and of itself, but instead a posture that we're willing to enter into it. And I would presume there that there's another distinction to be made, and that is between suffering that somehow can lead to transformation of the self or growth, and a sort of useless suffering that one perhaps could get out of, but might require some very difficult decisions. How would you think about that distinction?
Unsurprisingly, my mind turns to developmental models for this. If one can imagine that there is a 3-year-old who's not getting what they want, and they are upset about it, and they are crying about it, and they are upset in their crying, and the mom has given them a choice. You can sit there and cry and be upset, or you can have this snack. But that's not the snack that they want. They want a different snack. And the mom holds the line with loving kindness and says, you may have this snack or none at all. And so your choice is you can suffer or you can have your snack. And they will sometimes choose to suffer. And mom will say, that's okay. I guess you're just not going to have your snack. And this is what it means for parents to train children to become more resilient. Children have to learn how to tolerate living in a world in which they do not always receive what they want, because there are other wiser people who are thinking ahead of them, for them, in that regard. That picture is not unlike what we might see in lots of different spaces, where people are not getting what they want, they are upset about it, and they would describe their distress and their pain as a certain kind of suffering that is because of choices that they are making. I have a certain kind of suffering that I'm going to endure if I am committed to my addiction. And if I don't want to suffer in that way, I'm going to have to decide if I'm going to be willing to step out of my addiction. And this is true for lots of us, where we think that suffering is really just about me managing my pain, when really it also has to do with me not getting what I want, when what I actually want is not perhaps good for me. This is tricky because we live in a world in which we are very loath to have anybody else tell me what is good and bad for me.
So as we move toward a close, leave us maybe with a word of encouragement. If someone finds themselves resonating deeply with what you shared today, what would be some practical steps forward in the right direction?
I tell people the news about shame is far worse than you know and far better than you can imagine. And I say the same thing about desire. As you mentioned at the top of our time, desire is often kind of given a bad word. We're anxious, we're worried about it. And we're worried because we haven't really allowed ourselves to really explore it in the way we're made to explore this, not in some way that I can just have whatever I want, however I want it, whenever I want it. But the opposite of that, my not asking for what I want at all, is equally unhelpful. And so I think one thing that I would be curious about is like, what is it that you want and how is that related to the question of who are you becoming? Who do you want to become? Because I want to say that if you're actually paying attention to becoming a person of integrity, becoming a person of wisdom, of honor, of love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, and all the rest, no matter what your faith experience is, if that's the kind of person that you want to become, then there will be certain things that you will want, and I will want you to go get them. And then doing an inventory about shame, where are you burning energy? Containing shame about things where there is unfinished healing business that needs to be taken care of, where there are unrepaired ruptures. And who are the people who can come to find you to help that happen in order for you to take even more seriously those places in your life where you suffer so that you will not suffer alone, in order for you to realize that you were made to create beauty and goodness in the world while you become beauty and goodness in the world at the same time. That's what we were made to be.
Been talking to Dr. Curt Thompson. Curt, always great to be with you. Thanks so much for your time today and all the beautiful work you're doing in the world. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Here's one small closing take on today's interview with Dr. Curt Thompson. First, a note on Curt's insistence, along with much classical moral philosophy, that desire is not bad, it's good. But this assertion does not mean that our desires need not be interrogated, challenged, or trained. So Curt further asserted that when considering our desires, the pursuit of our desires, we must be willing to ask ourselves, what kind of person am I becoming in that pursuit? We might work hard, pursue our desires, know immense success, but the question remains, what kind of person am I becoming? What kind of person have I become in that pursuit? Curt did not leave us with that question as mere abstract observation, but gave us a specific practice to try in this regard. And at this moment, when I'm speaking these words, I have not yet had the courage to practice it, but perhaps you and I both can find enough backbone to try it. The practice I'm referring to is his suggestion that we put to the people closest to us this question: what is it like for you to live with me? Who do you see me becoming? That's obviously no small talk conversation starter. It's more like a spiritual practice which has the capacity to keep us from a devastating trap, namely the fact that I can win, so-called, at life, get the thing, achieve my aspiration, curate the image, and then, Curt's words again, turn into a real scoundrel and not really even be aware that that's the case. So the question, did I get it? Did I accomplish it? Did I achieve it? Can't be a primary question, it seems, in a good life. A more fundamental question, a more important question is this: what did getting it, accomplishing it, achieving it, what did all that do to me? What did all that make of me? So this week, maybe you and I both can try this small, brave thing to ask one person you trust, what's it like to live with me lately? And then, no defending or explaining, just listen. By doing so, we might get a precious glimpse, even if it is acutely uncomfortable, a precious glimpse of the person we are becoming. That's a small, but not so small take on today's episode. Peace to you, my friend. You've been listening to No Small Endeavor and our interview with psychiatrist, speaker, and author Curt Thompson about his work at the intersection of spiritual formation and interpersonal neurobiology. We gratefully acknowledge the support of Lilly Endowment Incorporated, a private philanthropic foundation supporting the causes of community development, education, and religion. Our thanks to all the stellar team that makes this show possible: Christy Bragg, Jacob Lewis, Carrie Harmon, Jason Cheesley, Sophie Byard, Kate Hayes, Mary Evelyn Brown, and Audrey Griffith. Our theme song was composed by Tim Lauer. Thanks for listening, and let's keep exploring what it means to live a good life together. No Small Endeavor is a production of Tokens Media, LLC, and
Great Feeling Studio.